Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Dominic Washburn had built his empire from nothing. At 45, he commanded respect in Los Angeles real estate circles, not through inherited wealth, but through calculated moves and an iron will that never bent to pressure. His wife, Candace, a stunning blonde who'd caught his eye at a charity gala 15 years ago, had seemed the perfect complement to his ambition. Together, they'd raised 2 children. Natalie, now 24 and about to marry her college sweetheart in Maui, and Spencer, their unexpected blessing who'd arrived when Candace was 38. Dominic prided himself on reading people. In business, that skill had made him millions. He could spot a liar across a conference table, smell desperation in a seller's voice, and identify opportunity where others saw only risk. It was this same instinct that had initially drawn him to Candace, her authenticity in a world full of artificial faces. Or so he believed. The Washburn family had always presented a picture of success. Their Bel Air mansion hosted charity events that raised hundreds of thousands for children's hospitals. Candace's interior design business, Golden Touch Designs, had flourished with Dominic's connections, landing her contracts with Hollywood elite. Their marriage had weathered the typical storms, the stress of Dominic's demanding schedule, Candace's postpartum depression after Spencer's birth, and the general challenges of raising children in Los Angeles' pressure cooker environment. But Dominic had rules. Simple, non-negotiable rules that he'd learned from his father, a man who'd lost everything to a cheating business partner. Trust was earned, betrayal was unforgivable, and family came first. Always. These principles had guided every major decision in his life, from his choice of business partners to his approach to fatherhood. As their plane descended toward Maui's airport, Dominic watched Spencer's face pressed against the window, marveling at the tropical paradise below. At 6, Spencer possessed an unusual intensity for a child his age. Teachers described him as perceptive beyond his years, and Dominic had noticed his youngest son's uncanny ability to sense tension in rooms before adults even acknowledged it. "Daddy, will you dance with me at Natalie's wedding?" Spencer asked, turning from the window with serious blue eyes that mirrored Dominic's own. "Of course, buddy. We'll show everyone how the Washburn men dance," Dominic replied, ruffling his son's sandy hair. Candace sat across the aisle, absorbed in wedding planning details on her tablet. She'd been distant during the flight, claiming stress over last-minute arrangements. Dominic had attributed it to typical pre-wedding jitters and her perfectionist nature. After all, this was their daughter's big day, and Candace had invested months in ensuring every detail reflected the Washburn family standards. The rehearsal dinner at the Grand Wailea Resort was everything Natalie had dreamed of. Dominic's toast to his daughter and her fiancé, Craig Pratt, brought tears to guests' eyes as he spoke about the foundation of love being built on trust, respect, and unwavering loyalty. The irony of those words would haunt him later. That evening, as they returned to their suite, Spencer seemed restless. He'd been quiet during dinner, picking at his food and watching the adults with that intense gaze that sometimes unnerved babysitters. Candace had already gone to bed, claiming exhaustion, leaving Dominic to handle bedtime duties. "Daddy," Spencer whispered as Dominic tucked him in, "sometimes I hear things." "What kind of things, buddy?" "Things that make me feel scared in my tummy." Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, his parental instincts sharpening. "What do you mean?" "Bad dreams." Spencer shook his head. "Not dreams. Real things. Like when grown-ups think kids can't hear them, but I can." A chill ran down Dominic's spine, but he kept his voice calm. "What have you heard that scares you?" "I can't say. But promise me something, Daddy." "Anything, Spencer. Promise you'll always protect our family, no matter what." The weight of that request, coming from a 6-year-old, settled heavily on Dominic's chest. "I promise, son. Always." Chapter 2. The Warning. The wedding day dawned perfect. Azure skies, gentle trade winds, and the kind of golden sunlight that made everything look like a movie set. Natalie was radiant in her grandmother's restored lace gown, and Craig couldn't stop grinning as guests gathered on the beach for the 4 o'clock ceremony. Dominic had been handling last-minute logistics when Spencer found him adjusting his tie in their suite's mirror. The boy's face was pale, his usual playful demeanor replaced by something that looked almost adult in its seriousness. "Daddy, you need to go back to LA right now." The statement was so unexpected, so urgent, that Dominic nearly dropped his cufflinks. "What? Spencer, what are you talking about?" "The wedding is tomorrow," he caught himself, realizing his mistake in the heat of the moment. "The wedding is today, in just a few hours." Spencer's small hands gripped Dominic's sleeve with surprising strength. "There's no time to explain. Take the next flight." The boy's eyes held a knowledge that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Dominic knelt to Spencer's level, studying his son's face for any sign this was some kind of elaborate game. But Spencer had never been the type for pranks or manipulation. If anything, he was almost brutally honest, a trait that had gotten him in trouble at school when he'd told his teacher her breath smelled like coffee and sadness. "Spencer, I can't leave your sister's wedding. This is the most important day of her life. Daddy, please." Spencer's voice cracked, and tears threatened at the corners of his eyes. "Something bad is happening at home. I can feel it. You have to go now before it's too late." The intensity of Spencer's plea sent ice through Dominic's veins. His son wasn't prone to dramatics or attention-seeking behavior. When Spencer said something, he meant it, and that inexplicable intuition of his had been right before. Like the time he'd insisted they leave a restaurant minutes before a drunk driver crashed through the front window, or when he'd refused to let Dominic take a particular route to school, only for them to later learn about a massive pileup on that exact stretch of highway. Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your foundation is cracking. Check the home you built." The message disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him wondering if he'd imagined it. But Spencer's expression confirmed he hadn't. "That's why you have to go, Daddy, before the cracks become holes." The metaphor was too sophisticated for a 6-year-old, yet Spencer delivered it with the gravity of someone who understood its implications. Dominic felt the familiar stirring of his business instincts, the same feeling that had warned him away from deals that later proved disastrous for other investors. "What about the wedding, buddy? Natalie will be heartbroken if I'm not here." Spencer's face crumpled briefly before hardening with resolve that looked eerily similar to Dominic's own expression when making difficult decisions. "Natalie will understand when she knows the truth. But if you don't go now, there won't be anything left to come back to." 30 minutes later, Dominic was in a taxi heading to Kahului Airport, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and confusion. He'd made his excuses to Natalie, a family emergency that required his immediate attention, and promised to explain everything when he returned. His daughter's initial hurt had transformed into concern when she saw the genuine worry in his eyes. Candace had been strangely calm about his departure, almost relieved. She'd kissed his cheek and murmured something about handling things until he got back, but her eyes hadn't quite met his. At the time, he'd attributed it to wedding stress. Now 30,000 feet above the Pacific, he wondered what else it might have been. The red-eye flight to LAX gave him 6 hours to think, and none of his thoughts were comforting. Spencer's warning echoed in his mind alongside that mysterious text message. "Your foundation is cracking." What foundation? His business was solid. He just closed the biggest deal of his career 3 weeks ago. His family seemed stable, despite the usual tensions. His health was good. His finances were secure. But Spencer had said to check the home he'd built. Not just the physical house, but the home, the life, the trust, the foundation of everything he'd worked to create. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Dominic felt a familiar sensation in his gut, the same one that had warned him away from bad investments and dishonest partners. Something was very wrong, and he was about to discover just how wrong. Chapter 3: The Discovery. The taxi pulled into the circular driveway of the Washburn estate at 7:23 a.m. Dominic paid the driver and stood for a moment, studying the house he'd bought 12 years ago as a symbol of his success. The Spanish colonial architecture had always pleased him, its solid lines and elegant proportions reflecting his taste for quality without ostentation. Now, something about it felt different, Not wrong, exactly, but like a familiar song played in a minor key. Using his key, Dominic entered through the front door and immediately noticed the silence. No housekeeper bustling about her morning routine, no gardener's equipment visible through the windows. The house felt abandoned, despite everything appearing normal on the surface. He climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, each step echoing in the unusual quiet. The door was ajar, and as he pushed it open, he gasped and froze in place. The room had been transformed into something unrecognizable. The bed where he'd slept beside Candace for 15 years was still there, but it was unmade in a way that spoke of passion, not rest. Scattered across the floor were clothes, not just Candace's, but men's clothing he didn't recognize. Expensive cologne lingered in the air, a scent that was decidedly not his own. On the nightstand, Candace's phone lay forgotten and unlocked. The screen showed a text conversation that made Dominic's blood turn to ice. Brett, coast is clear. Dominic's plane doesn't land until tomorrow night. Candace, good. I need this time with you before we tell him. Brett, you sure you want to go through with this? He's not going to just roll over. Candace, I don't care anymore. I'm tired of pretending. 15 years is enough. Brett, what about the kids? Candace, Natalie's starting her own life. As for Spencer, children are resilient. The phone slipped from Dominic's trembling fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Brett Hendricks. Dominic knew that name. He was Candace's business partner in Golden Touch Designs, a smooth-talking former actor who transitioned into interior design after his look started to fade. Dominic had never liked him, finding something artificial in his ready smile and expensive veneers. But this wasn't just about liking or disliking someone. This was about betrayal at its most fundamental level. The woman he'd trusted with his heart, his children, his future, had been deceiving him. And not just with an affair. The text messages suggested something much more calculated. Before we tell him what? Dominic's business mind, trained to analyze and strategize under pressure, began to function despite his emotional devastation. If Candace and Brett were planning to tell him something, and if they believed they had until tomorrow night to prepare, then he had an advantage they didn't know about. Spencer's warning had given him time to understand the full scope of their betrayal before they knew he knew. He photographed the text conversation with his own phone, then carefully searched the room for other evidence. In Candace's jewelry box, he found a key he didn't recognize. Behind her mirror, tucked into the frame, was a business card for a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney, but Patricia Chun, known throughout Los Angeles for her ruthless approach to high-asset divorces. Her clients typically walked away with significantly more than they'd brought to their marriages. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just an affair. It was a planned destruction of his life. How long had they been plotting this? How much of his recent past had been a lie? Dominic descended to his home office, a sanctuary where he'd built his business empire through careful planning and strategic thinking. Now he would use those same skills for a different purpose. He pulled out a legal pad and began to write, documenting everything he'd discovered. The photos, the timeline, the implications. His phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Dad, the wedding was beautiful. Can't wait to show you pictures. Is everything okay at home? Everything was not okay at home. Everything was shattered. But Natalie didn't need to know that yet. Her honeymoon shouldn't be tainted by this knowledge. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Handle some business and be back soon. Enjoy your honeymoon. As he typed the lie, Dominic felt something fundamental shift inside him. The trusting husband, the man who'd believed in the goodness of the woman he'd married, was dying. In his place, something harder and more dangerous was being born. Candace and Brett thought they were playing a game where they held all the cards. They had no idea they were about to face a man who'd spent 20 years learning how to destroy enemies who underestimated him. In business, Dominic Washburn was known for his ability to ruin competitors who crossed him. He'd driven hostile takeover attempts into bankruptcy, turned allies against each other, and systematically dismantled anyone foolish enough to try to cheat him. Now, for the first time in his life, those skills would be turned toward personal revenge. They wanted to tell him something? He'd let them. But by the time they opened their mouths, he'd already orchestrated their destruction so completely that their words would be meaningless. Dominic opened his laptop and began a plan. Chapter 4. The Predator's Preparation. Dominic spent the next 18 hours becoming a hunter. He'd always possessed the instincts for it. In business, the ability to identify weakness and exploit, it was what separated successful entrepreneurs from the merely ambitious. Now he turned that predatory focus toward the two people who'd betrayed him most deeply. His first call was to Gary Long, a private investigator who'd helped him with background checks on potential business partners. Gary was thorough, discreet, and had a talent for uncovering information that people preferred to keep buried. Dominic, I thought you were in Hawaii for your daughter's wedding. Change of plans. I need you to do a comprehensive investigation. Complete background on Brett Hendricks, finances, relationships, business dealings, everything. I also need surveillance on my wife, Candace. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to, every transaction she makes. Gary's silence stretched for several seconds. Dom, this sounds personal. You sure you want to go down this road? Gary, in all the years you've known me, have I ever asked you to do anything I wasn't absolutely certain about? No, you haven't. When do you need this? I need preliminary information by tonight. Full report within 48 hours. It'll cost extra for the rush job. Money isn't an object. But Gary, this stays between us. No records, no paper trail that can be traced back to me. After hanging up, Dominic began his own investigation. Years of conducting due diligence on business deals had taught him how to research someone's life with surgical precision. He started with social media, using fake accounts to access Brett's profiles and those of his associates. What he discovered painted a picture of a man living far beyond his apparent means. Brett's Instagram showed expensive dinners, luxury vacations, and designer clothing that didn't align with the profits from Golden Touch Designs. More telling were the photos from the past 6 months. Images where Brett was clearly in locations that Dominic recognized as places Candace had claimed to be traveling for business. A photo from 3 weeks ago showed Brett at the Four Seasons in San Francisco, champagne in hand, with a woman's manicured fingers visible at the edge of the frame. Candace had been in San Francisco that same weekend, ostensibly meeting with a client. The manicure was distinctive, French tips with a small diamond accent on the ring finger, exactly like the one Candace had gotten at her regular salon. Dominic cross-referenced dates and locations, building a timeline of deception that stretched back nearly 8 months. Every business trip, every late client meeting, every weekend emergency that had required Candace's attention, they all aligned with Brett's social media presence. But the timeline revealed something even more disturbing. 8 months ago was when Candace had first suggested they update their estate planning. She'd insisted they revise their wills, arguing that their growing wealth required more sophisticated arrangements. At the time, her logic had seemed sound, and Dominic had agreed to the changes she'd researched. Now, he pulled out those documents and studied them with new eyes. The revisions weren't just updates. They were strategic moves that would leave Candace in control of significant assets if something happened to him. Moreover, she'd insisted on life insurance policies that would make her a very wealthy widow. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about leaving him for another man. This was about taking everything he'd built and possibly ensuring he couldn't fight back. His phone rang. Gary's name appeared on the screen. I've got some preliminary information, and Dom, you're not going to like it. Tell me, Brett Hendricks has been living on credit for the past year. He's got gambling debts to some very unpleasant people, the kind who don't accept payment plans. Word is he's desperate for a big score to get out from under them. How big are the debts? North of $2 million. And here's the kicker. 3 months ago, someone paid off a significant chunk of those debts. Cash transaction, untraceable source. Dominic's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, Candace had liquidated some of her personal investments, claiming she wanted to diversify their portfolio. The amount had been substantial, enough to make a serious dent in Brett's gambling debts. There's more, Gary continued. I contacted a source in the LAPD. Your wife has been asking questions about California's domestic violence laws. Specifically, She wanted to know about restraining orders and how they affect property division in divorce proceedings. The implication was clear and terrifying. Candace wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to destroy his reputation in the process. A domestic violence allegation, even if false, would devastate his business relationships and potentially give her an advantage in divorce proceedings that would leave him financially crippled. Gary, I want 24-hour surveillance on both of them starting immediately. I want to know what they're planning when they're planning it and who else is involved. Consider it done. But Dom, if they're planning what I think they're planning, you need to be very careful about how you respond. One wrong move, and they could flip the script on you. After ending the call, Dominic sat in his office as afternoon shadows lengthened across the hardwood floors. The house felt like a mausoleum now, every room contaminated by the knowledge of Candace's betrayal. But beneath the hurt and rage, his strategic mind was already working. If Candace and Brett wanted to play a game of destruction, he would show them what a real predator looked like. They'd spent months planning their attack, believing they held all the advantages. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd underestimated the man they were trying to destroy. Dominic opened his laptop and began drafting the first moves in what would become their complete annihilation. By the time he was finished with them, they'd understand why he'd never lost a business war in 20 years. Some lessons could only be taught through total defeat. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. Dominic's phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a text from Gary. They're moving. Meeting at Chateau Marmont in an hour. Attorney will be there. Perfect. While Candace and Brett thought they were orchestrating the next phase of their plan, Dominic was already 3 moves ahead. He'd spent the night preparing what would become their undoing, using resources and connections they didn't even know existed. His first call was to Dean Robinson, a forensic accountant who specialized in complex financial investigations. Dean had helped Dominic expose fraudulent partnerships in the past, and his work was always thorough enough to stand up in court. Dean, I need you to conduct a complete audit of Golden Touch Designs. I want every transaction, every client payment, every business expense examined. I'm particularly interested in any irregularities in the past 8 months. Is this for potential acquisition? Something like that. How quickly can you get started? I can have a preliminary analysis by end of business today if you expedite the paperwork. Dominic's second call was to his own attorney, Albert Small, a man whose reputation for ruthless effectiveness in high-stakes litigation was legendary throughout Los Angeles. Albert, I need to see you immediately. Bring everything related to my estate planning, and I want you to prepare for what's going to be a very complex divorce proceeding. Dominic, is everything all right? Everything's about to be very all right. How soon can you be here? While waiting for Albert to arrive, Dominic reviewed the information Gary had gathered overnight. The surveillance photos were damning. Candace and Brett entering the Chateau Marmont together at 11:30 p.m., not emerging until 7:15 a.m. But more interesting were the photos of their companion, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and an expensive briefcase. A reverse image search identified her as Patricia Chun, the divorce attorney whose business card he'd found in Candace's jewelry box. But what made Dominic's blood run cold was the timestamp on one photo. Patricia Chun had met with Brett alone 2 weeks ago at a restaurant in Beverly Hills. This wasn't a recent decision or a crime of passion. This was a calculated attack that had been in planning for weeks, possibly months. Albert arrived within the hour, his usual composed demeanor becoming increasingly grave as Dominic laid out the evidence. The attorney studied the photographs, the financial records, and the timeline Dominic had constructed. This is bad, Dominic. If they're planning what I think they're planning, they could potentially claim half of everything you've built, plus substantial spousal support. California's no-fault divorce laws, combined with the length of your marriage, give them significant leverage. What if I can prove adultery? California is a no-fault state. Adultery doesn't typically affect property division unless you can prove she used marital assets to fund the affair. Dominic smiled grimly. What if I can prove that and more? He handed Albert a document he'd prepared during the sleepless night. It outlined a theory that had been forming in his mind. that Candace and Brett hadn't just been having an affair, but had been systematically positioning themselves to take control of his business assets. Look at the timing, Dominic explained. 8 months ago, Candace pushed for changes to our estate planning. 6 months ago, she suggested we restructure Golden Touch Designs to give her more operational control for tax purposes. 4 months ago, she insisted on updating our business insurance policies. Every suggestion positioned her to benefit if something happened to me or our marriage. Albert's eyes widened as he studied the pattern. This could constitute fraud if you can prove they were in collusion from the beginning. I can prove it, but I need something else from you first. What? I want to give them exactly what they think they want. For the next 2 hours, Dominic and Albert crafted a strategy that would lure Candace and Brett into a trap of their own making. The plan required patience, precision, and a willingness to appear vulnerable when he was actually at his strongest. At 2:30 p.m., Dominic received another text from Gary. They're planning to move against you tomorrow. Patricia Chun is filing papers in the morning. Candace will serve you when you return from Hawaii. Dominic's phone immediately rang. Candace's name appeared on the screen. Darling. Her voice was honey-sweet, with just a hint of concern. How are things going there? When will you be back? Tomorrow night, as planned. Everything's fine here. How's Spencer? He's been quiet since you left. Keeps asking when you're coming home. I think he misses you more than usual. The irony wasn't lost on Dominic. Spencer had saved him from walking blindly into their ambush. His 6-year-old son had demonstrated more loyalty in one moment than his wife had shown in 15 years of marriage. Tell him I miss him too. Candace, is everything all right? You sound different. Just tired, I suppose. Planning a wedding takes more out of you than you expect. I'll be glad when things get back to normal. Normal. As if there was any possibility of normal after what she'd done. I love you, he said, injecting just enough emotion into his voice to sound genuine. I love you too, Dominic. Safe travels. The lie came so easily to her. Dominic wondered how many others he'd failed to recognize over the years. After hanging up, he made one final call to Spencer, using the secure phone he'd given Natalie for emergencies. Hey, buddy. How's my brave boy doing? Daddy, when are you coming home? Mommy's been acting weird, and Brett keeps coming over. I know, Spencer. That's why you were right to tell me to come back. You saved our family by being so smart and brave. Are you going to fix everything? Yes, son. I'm going to fix everything. But it might be confusing for a while, okay? No matter what happens, remember that I love you and Natalie more than anything in the world. I know, Daddy. Will you still protect us like you promised? Always, Spencer. Always. As evening settled over Los Angeles, Dominic reviewed his preparations one final time. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation Candace and Brett had been planning, but they would discover they'd brought knives to a gunfight. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late to save themselves. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. At 9:15 a.m., Candace Washburn and Brett Hendricks sat in Patricia Chin's Beverly Hills office, reviewing the final papers that would destroy Dominic's life. They had no idea that 3 blocks away, Dominic was watching live surveillance footage of their meeting while Albert Small made the final preparations for their counterattack. The restraining order will be filed immediately after we serve the divorce papers, Patricia explained to her clients. Candace's statement about feeling threatened, combined with Dominic's reputation for aggressive business tactics, should be enough to get preliminary approval. What about the children? Candace asked, though her tone suggested the question was more procedural than maternal. Spencer will stay with you, obviously. He's young enough that the court will favor maternal custody. Natalie is an adult, so that's not a factor. Brett leaned forward, his desperation barely concealed beneath his practiced charm. And the business assets. Once the restraining order is in place, Candace will have temporary control of Golden Touch Designs and access to the joint accounts. If we can demonstrate that Dominic's aggressive behavior makes him unstable, we can potentially freeze his access to other assets pending a full psychological evaluation. Dominic closed the laptop and turned to Albert. How long do we let this play out? Let them file everything. Let them think they've won. Then we destroy them. At 11:43 a.m., A process server arrived at Dominic's office building with 2 sets of papers. The divorce filing painted him as a controlling, potentially violent husband whose business success had made him believe he was above accountability. The restraining order application included a sworn statement from Candace describing incidents of emotional abuse that Dominic knew had never occurred. What broke his heart wasn't the lies themselves, but how expertly crafted they were. Candace had twisted legitimate arguments about business decisions into examples of controlling behavior. She'd reframed his protective instincts toward their children as possessive manipulation. Every gesture of love throughout their marriage had been recontextualized as evidence of his unstable need for dominance. But what enraged him was the final paragraph of her statement. I fear for my son's safety if he continues to be exposed to his father's increasingly erratic behavior. Recent incidents have convinced me that Dominic's mental state has deteriorated to the point where he poses a genuine threat to our family's well-being. They were trying to take Spencer away from him. The son who'd save him from this ambush was being used as a weapon against him. Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from Candace. Just got word that someone served papers at your office. I'm so sorry this is happening. Come home so we can talk about it. The performance was masterful. She was positioning herself as the surprised, concerned wife while simultaneously ensuring he'd return to the house where they could serve him personally and complete their trap. Dominic texted back, flying back early. Landing at 6 p.m. We need to figure this out together. Of course, darling. I'll be waiting. At 4:30 p.m., Dominic walked into his house for the second time in 3 days, but this time he wasn't alone. Hidden throughout the property were surveillance devices that Gary had installed, ensuring every word of the coming confrontation would be recorded. Albert waited in a car 3 blocks away, ready to move when Dominic gave the signal. Candace was in the living room, perfectly arranged in a pose of wounded vulnerability. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a soft sweater that made her look smaller, minimal makeup that suggested she'd been crying, her hair slightly disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it in distress. Dominic, thank God you're home. I don't understand what's happening. These papers. I know about Brett. The words hit her like a physical blow. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then, just as quickly, she reassembled her expression into one of confused hurt. What about Brett? Dominic, what are you talking about? I know about the affair. I know about the planning. I know about Patricia Chun. Candace's face went pale, but she recovered with impressive speed. Dominic, you're scaring me. You're not making sense. Maybe we should call Dr. Stevens. Drop the act, Candace. I've seen the text messages. I've seen the financial records. I know about Brett's gambling debts and how you've been paying them off with our money. You went through my phone? Her voice rose with what sounded like genuine outrage. How dare you violate my privacy like that? The deflection was expertly played, but Dominic had spent 3 days preparing for every response she might give. Your privacy? After 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building a life together, 15 years of me trusting you with everything I had. You want to talk about privacy? Dominic, please. You're being paranoid. Brett is my business partner, nothing more. These legal papers, I don't know where they came from, but maybe someone is trying to frame me. The front door opened, and Brett Hendricks walked in with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He'd clearly been waiting nearby for his cue to enter, probably expecting to find Dominic devastated and vulnerable, ready to accept whatever terms they offered. Instead, he found a man who looked like a predator that had been circling its prey for days. Brett, Dominic said calmly. Perfect timing. We were just discussing your gambling problem. Brett's carefully rehearsed expression of surprised concern crumbled instantly. Dom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine. I understood you to be a moderately successful interior designer with a side business partnership with my wife. What you actually are is a desperate gambler who seduced my wife as part of a plan to steal everything I've built. That's insane, Candace said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Dominic, you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of the business or Natalie's wedding. Show them, Albert. Albert Small stepped through the front door, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent 30 years destroying people in courtrooms. Mrs. Washburn, Mr. Hendricks. I'm Albert Small, Mr. Washburn's attorney. I have some documents I think you'll find interesting. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. Albert opened his briefcase with the deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The documents he withdrew would perform surgery on Candace and Brett's lives, cutting away everything they'd hoped to steal. Let's start with the financial records, Albert said, spreading papers across the coffee table. 3 months ago, Mrs. Washburn liquidated $2.3 million in personal investments. The money was transferred to an offshore account, then used to pay gambling debts owed by Mr. Hendricks to several Las Vegas casinos and some rather unforgiving private lenders. Candace's face had gone ashen, but she rallied one more time. That's not illegal. I'm allowed to help a friend. Using marital assets to fund your lover's debts while planning to defraud your husband? Actually, that's several types of illegal. Albert's voice was professionally pleasant, the tone of a man delivering a death sentence with a smile. But we're just getting started. He pulled out another set of documents. This is a forensic analysis of Golden Touch Designs books for the past 8 months. Mr. Hendricks has been systematically overcharging clients and pocketing the difference. Normally, this would be simple embezzlement. However, since Mrs. Washburn signed off on these invoices, it becomes conspiracy to commit fraud. Brett had stopped trying to maintain his composure. You can't prove I knew about any of this. Maybe Candace was manipulating the books without telling me. Ah, loyalty among thieves, Dominic said. How quickly you throw her under the bus when things get difficult. Albert continued his methodical destruction. The conspiracy charge is supported by these surveillance photos showing you and Mrs. Washburn meeting with clients, discussing prices, and later celebrating your successful deception. The pattern of behavior clearly indicates ongoing collusion. Candace finally found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. What do you want? What do I want? Dominic's voice was soft, dangerous. I want you to understand what you've done. You've destroyed a 15-year marriage. You've traumatized our children. You betrayed every promise you ever made to me. And you did it all for money and a man who just tried to blame everything on you. Dominic, please. But here's what really makes me angry, Candace. You tried to use Spencer against me. You were going to claim I was unstable, dangerous to my own son, the boy who saved me from your trap, and you were going to turn him into a weapon. Albert pulled out the final document. This brings us to the restraining order and divorce filing. Unfortunately for you both, these documents contain several statements that can be proven false. Filing false statements in legal proceedings is perjury. When combined with the fraud charges, we're looking at serious prison time. Wait, Brett said, his desperation finally breaking through completely. We can work something out. I'll testify against Candace, tell you everything about how she planned this. The sound of Dominic's laughter was more terrifying than any shout would have been. You think this is a negotiation? You think you have something to offer me? Dominic stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Spencer had played just days ago, back when Dominic still believed his family was real. Here's what's going to happen, he said without turning around. Candace, you're going to sign divorce papers that leave you with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Nothing. You'll relinquish all claims to this house, to the business, to any assets we accumulated together. I'll never sign that, she said, but her voice shook. Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll file criminal charges that will send you to prison for 10 to 15 years. Brett, too. And Spencer will testify about what he witnessed. Your business meetings with Brett, your lies about where you were going, everything a smart 6-year-old sees that adults think he doesn't understand. Candace's composure finally shattered completely. You bastard. You manipulative, controlling bastard. I should have left you years ago. There she is, Dominic said, finally turning back to face her. The real Candace. Not the loving wife, not the devoted mother, not the successful businesswoman. Just a greedy, selfish woman who was willing to destroy her family for money. Albert placed a pen next to the papers on the coffee table. Mrs. Washburn, these documents will give you a clean exit. No criminal charges, No public humiliation, no prison time. All you have to do is sign and walk away. And if I don't, Dominic's smile was arctic. Then I destroy you both so completely that when I'm finished, you'll wish you'd never been born. I'll use every connection, every resource, every weapon at my disposal. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are and what you did. You can't do that. Candace, I've spent 20 years learning how to destroy people who try to cheat me. The only difference is that this time, it's personal. That doesn't make me more merciful. It makes me more thorough. Brett, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. What about me? Dominic turned his attention to the man who'd helped destroy his marriage. Brett, you're going to sign a confession detailing your role in this fraud. You're going to return every penny you stole from my wife's clients. And then you're going to leave Los Angeles and never come back. And if I don't, then you'll explain to Detective Anthony O'Connor of the LAPD exactly how you've been running financial scams. He's waiting outside, by the way. The decision is yours. Sign the papers and leave town, or let him arrest you for fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. Albert checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, the offer expires, and we proceed with criminal charges. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of Candace sobbing and Brett's heavy breathing. Everything they'd planned, every careful move they'd made, had been turned against them with surgical precision. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Candace reached for the pen. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. Candace's hand trembled as she signed the papers, each signature another nail in the coffin of the life she'd tried to steal. Brett had already signed his confession and plea agreement, his earlier bravado replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. There's one more thing, Dominic said after Albert collected the signed documents. Spencer. Candace looked up from the papers, mascara streaking her cheeks. What about him? You're going to tell him goodbye. You're going to explain that you made some very bad choices and that you won't be living here anymore. And you're going to do it in a way that doesn't traumatize him more than you already have. He's my son, too. No. Dominic's voice cut through her protest like a blade. You stopped being his mother the moment you decided to use him as a weapon against me. You would have destroyed that boy's relationship with his father to cover up your crimes. A real mother protects her children. You were willing to sacrifice yours for money. Brett stood up shakily, probably hoping to escape before things got worse for him. Dom, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but you're right. It doesn't mean anything. But let me give you some advice for your new life, Brett. Whatever city you end up in, whatever new name you choose to use, remember this moment. Remember what happens to people who try to cheat me. Because if I ever see you again, if you ever contact my family again, if you ever even think about coming back to Los Angeles, I will finish what I started here today. The threat was delivered with such quiet intensity that Brett actually stumbled backward. I understand. No, I don't think you do. You see, Brett, this wasn't just about money for you. This was about taking something that belonged to me, thinking you could outsmart me, believing you could destroy my life and walk away untouched. That kind of arrogance requires a more permanent lesson. Dominic walked to his desk and pulled out a file folder. I've had 48 hours to learn everything about you, Brett. Your real name is Brett Henley, and you changed it after running investment scams in Phoenix. You have a daughter in Oregon who thinks you're dead because you abandoned her rather than pay child support. You've been using fake credentials to get design contracts, since you never actually graduated from the programs you claim on your resume. Brett's face went white. How did you? Money and time, Brett. 2 things I have more of than you can imagine. Now, here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to take the Greyhound bus to Portland tonight. You're going to find your daughter and start paying the child support you've avoided for 8 years. You're going to get a legitimate job and live an honest life. And you're going to send me a monthly report proving you're doing all of this. What if I refuse? Dominic smiled, and Brett actually flinched. Then I release this information to every person in your daughter's life. Her school, her friends' parents, her mother's employer. I'll make sure everyone knows that the father she thinks is dead is actually a con artist who abandoned her rather than take responsibility for his actions. The cruelty of it was exquisite. Brett could disappear and start over somewhere else. but he could never escape the knowledge that his daughter was out there, believing he was dead because he was too selfish to face his responsibilities. "You're a monster," Brett whispered. "No, Brett. I'm just someone who doesn't forgive or forget. You'll spend the rest of your life proving you've learned that lesson." Albert cleared his throat politely. "If Mr. Hendricks could gather his belongings and leave, we need to finalize Mrs. Washburn's arrangements." After Brett stumbled out the door, carrying a single suitcase and the weight of his complete destruction, Dominic turned his attention back to Candace. She sat on the couch like a broken doll, everything she'd thought she wanted crumbling around her. "Where will you go?" he asked, not out of concern but simple curiosity. "I don't know. My sister in Phoenix, maybe." "Your sister who told you 3 years ago that you were lucky to have a man like me? The one who said you were crazy to risk your marriage for anything? That sister." Candace's fresh tears confirmed that yes, that sister would be providing cold comfort indeed. "Candace, I want you to understand something. This isn't happening to you because I'm cruel or vindictive. This is happening because you made a choice. You chose to betray 15 years of marriage. You chose to steal from our family. You chose to try to turn our son against me. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of your decisions." "I know," she whispered. "Do you? Do you really? Because for the past hour, you've been trying to minimize what you did, blame circumstances, make excuses. Even now, I don't think you truly understand the magnitude of your betrayal." Dominic sat across from her, and for a moment, his voice carried an echo of the man who'd once loved her. "We could have had anything, Candace. I would have given you anything. All you had to do was be faithful. All you had to do was be honest." "I tried," she said, though it sounded hollow even to her. "No, you didn't. You got bored with being married to someone who worked hard for what he had. You wanted excitement, wanted to feel desired by someone new. And when you realized Brett needed money, you saw an opportunity to play out some fantasy where you could have both, the security of our marriage and the thrill of your affair." Candace started to protest, but Dominic held up a hand. "Here's what I've learned about you in the past 3 days, Candace. You're not evil, just weak. You're not stupid, just selfish. And you're not incapable of love, just incapable of sacrifice. Those are character flaws that could have been worked through if you'd been honest. But instead, you chose deception, theft, and betrayal." "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. "I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry your plan failed. You're sorry you're losing everything. But I don't think you're sorry for what you did to our family." Spencer's voice came from the top of the stairs. "Daddy, is Mommy leaving now?" Both parents looked up to see their 6-year-old son standing on the landing, still in his pajamas, holding his stuffed elephant. His face showed no surprise, no confusion, just the resignation of a child who'd understood the truth long before the adults were ready to admit it. "Yes, buddy, Mommy's leaving." Spencer walked down the stairs with the gravity of someone much older. "Are you sad, Daddy?" "I'm sad about some things, but not about others. I'm sad that our family won't be the same. But I'm not sad that we won't have any more lies." Spencer nodded solemnly, then walked over to Candace. "Bye, Mommy." She knelt down and hugged him, and for a moment, she was just a mother saying goodbye to her child. "I love you, Spencer." "I know," he said simply, "but you love other things more." The words, delivered with a child's brutal honesty, broke something in Candace that all of Dominic's strategic cruelty couldn't touch. She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked toward the door without another word. Just before she reached it, she turned back. "Dominic, what? You're going to make sure he knows it wasn't his fault, right? That he didn't cause this?" For the first time in 3 days, Dominic's expression softened slightly. "Of course." She nodded and left, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that sounded like the end of everything they'd once been. Chapter 9. After the Storm. 6 months later, Dominic stood in the same living room where his marriage had ended, but everything was different now. The house had been redecorated, not by a professional designer, but by a father and son who'd learned to build a new life from the ashes of their old one. Spencer had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that children possess when they finally understand they're safe. The lies were gone. The tension that had hung over their home like a toxic cloud had lifted, and in its place was something simpler but infinitely more valuable: honesty. "Daddy, Natalie's here," Spencer called from the front window, where he'd been watching for his sister's car. Natalie had returned from her honeymoon to find her family transformed. The initial shock and hurt had given way to a fierce protectiveness of her father and brother, especially after she learned the full scope of what Candace had planned. The betrayal had wounded her deeply, but it had also revealed the strength of the bonds that remained. "How are my two favorite men?" she asked, hugging them both as she came through the door. "We're good," Spencer announced. "Daddy taught me how to make pancakes, and I taught him how to play video games without getting angry when he loses." "Those are both very important skills," Natalie agreed solemnly. Over dinner, they talked about ordinary things: Spencer's upcoming school play, Natalie's new apartment with Craig, Dominic's latest business acquisition. The conversation was easy, natural, unmarked by the careful navigation of unspoken tensions that had characterized their family dinners for months before the revelation. "Have you heard anything about?" Natalie let the question trail off, but everyone understood. "Candace is working at a furniture store in Phoenix," Dominic said matter-of-factly. "Living in a studio apartment, dating a manager at a local restaurant. She seems to be attempting something resembling an honest life. And Brett is in Portland, working construction and living in a halfway house. He's been paying child support for 4 months now. His daughter knows he's alive, though she hasn't agreed to see him yet. Do you think she ever will?" Dominic considered the question. "I think children are more forgiving than adults, but they're also smarter about trust. She'll make her own decision when she's ready." "What about you, Dad? Any thoughts about dating?" Moving on, Dominic smiled at his daughter's careful phrasing. "Someday, maybe. But right now, I'm focused on building something solid with you two. I lost 15 years believing in something that wasn't real. I'm not in a hurry to repeat that mistake." Spencer looked up from his plate. "Daddy, when I grow up, how will I know if someone really loves me or if they're just pretending?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a child trying to understand the adult world's capacity for deception. "That's a good question, buddy. I think real love shows up in the small things. When someone chooses to tell you the truth, even when it's hard. When they keep their promises, even when it's inconvenient. When they protect you instead of using you. Like how you protected us. Like how we protect each other. That's what family means. We choose each other every day, no matter what." After Natalie left and Spencer was in bed, Dominic sat in his study, reviewing reports from Gary Long. The surveillance had ended months ago, but habit had led him to maintain loose oversight of Candace and Brett's activities. Not out of vindictiveness anymore, but from a pragmatic understanding that people rarely change as completely as they claim. Candace's life in Phoenix appeared genuinely humble. She worked retail, lived modestly, and seemed to have learned something from the complete destruction of her previous existence. Her relationship with the restaurant manager appeared honest. He knew about her divorce, her mistakes, her reduced circumstances. He'd chosen her anyway, perhaps because she was finally being authentic about who she was. Brett's situation was more complicated. The child support payments continued, but his attempts to contact his daughter had been rebuffed. His work performance was adequate, his living situation stable, but there was something in the surveillance reports that suggested a man going through the motions rather than genuinely changing. Dominic made a mental note to maintain monitoring for another 6 months. His phone buzzed with a text from Albert Small. Quarterly update. All legal settlements finalized. No outstanding issues. Both subjects maintaining compliance with agreements. Good. The legal machinery that had dismantled their lives would continue to ensure they stayed dismantled if they chose to repeat their mistakes. A knock on his study door interrupted his thoughts. Spencer stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant. "Can't sleep, buddy? I was thinking about Mommy." Dominic set aside his papers and gestured for Spencer to come in. "What about her? Do you think she misses us?" "I think she misses parts of us. She misses being your mother. She misses the comfortable life we had. But Spencer, she doesn't miss us enough to have chosen us when it mattered." Spencer climbed into the chair next to Dominic's desk. "I'm glad you chose us. I didn't just choose you, Spencer. You saved us. If you hadn't told me to come home that night, I would have walked right into their trap." You protected our family. Will you teach me how to protect families when I grow up? Dominic looked at his son, this serious, perceptive child who demonstrated more wisdom at 6 than some adults managed in decades. I'll teach you everything I know about recognizing people who deserve your trust and people who don't. I'll teach you how to build something real and how to defend it. And I'll teach you that loyalty isn't just about loving people. It's about choosing them every single day, especially when it's difficult. Even when they make mistakes. Even when they make mistakes. But Spencer, there's a difference between making mistakes and choosing to hurt people. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone chooses to betray the people who trust them. Spencer nodded with the gravity of someone filing away important information for future use. Daddy, yeah, I'm glad it's just us now. Dominic felt a warmth spread through his chest. Not the passionate love he'd felt for Candace, but something deeper and more enduring. The love of a family that had been tested by betrayal and emerged stronger. Me too, buddy. Me too. Outside, Los Angeles continued its relentless pursuit of dreams and ambitions. But inside the Washburn house, a father and son had found something more valuable than success or wealth or even love. They'd found truth, and they'd learned that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that teach you who deserves your loyalty and who doesn't. Dominic had spent 20 years learning how to destroy enemies who underestimated him. But in the end, the greatest victory wasn't destroying Candace and Brett. It was discovering that the family worth fighting for had been Spencer and Natalie all along. Some lessons could only be learned through betrayal. Some truths could